Hey, glad you're back. I'm Alex, and this is The Last Climb. Everest is being ruined, and the people ruining it are showing up with ring lights, gimbals, and hundreds of thousands of followers, thinking that's enough to survive the deadliest mountain on Earth. Today I have 6 stories where that exact mindset got these influencers killed. It was February 14th, 2026. The summit of Mount Everest sits at 29,032 feet above sea level on the border of Nepal and Tibet. Up there, the air has about a third of the oxygen you'd get at sea level, and that morning, the wind was calm for Everest, around 18 miles per hour, making it one of the only usable summit windows of the whole season. Keisha Duvall was 27, chronically online, and absolutely convinced she was built for this. She ran a lifestyle and wellness Instagram, fitness content, travel photos, motivational captions, you know the type. In the months before the climb, she was posting countdowns and sponsored gear shots with captions about how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Sounds great, right? Except her only mountaineering experience was a guided Kilimanjaro climb the year before, which she actually listed as her primary qualification when she signed up through a budget operator out of Kathmandu. She was on a fixed rotation schedule but skipped her second acclimatization rotation because it was cutting into her posting schedule. Here's the thing about skipping acclimatization on Everest. It doesn't bite you immediately. You feel totally fine. The problem builds quietly until your body gets pushed past a point it was never ready for. Above 26,000 feet, it stops adapting and just starts breaking down. HAP is what happens when fluid fills up in your lungs from that stress. It can hit within hours, and in the early stages you'd have no idea it was even happening. The summit push started at 11 p.m. from Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. Keisha was slower than expected from the start, stopping through the triangular face and the balcony to film clips and check her phone for signal. Her Sherpa flagged the pace twice. She hit the south summit around 7:40 a.m. and the true summit at roughly 9:15 a.m., already 45 minutes past the turnaround time her operator had set. And this is where it all falls apart. Instead of spending the standard 15 to 20 minutes at the top and heading down, Keisha started reshooting her arrival. First take had her oxygen mask on. Didn't like it, covered too much of her face. Second take, wind shifted. Third, hair was wrong. Fourth, her Sherpa was at the edge of the shot. He pointed down the mountain. She waved him off without even looking at him. By take 11, she had been at 29,032 feet for 2 hours and 20 minutes, pulling her oxygen mask on and off between shots like it was a prop. Every time that mask came off, she was breathing air with a third of the oxygen her body needed, over and over, for 2.5 hours. Her total oxygen use at the summit alone exceeded what had been set aside for the entire descent. She started down at around 11:40 a.m. Within the first hour, she was already slowing. By the South Col, her lips had a faint bluish tint, and she had a wet, productive cough, an early sign of HAPE. A teammate suggested calling for support. She said she was fine. She got back to her tent at Camp 4 around 3:30 p.m. and lay down. Her Sherpa gave her the last of the team's oxygen. No Gamoof bag. The operator hadn't packed one. At some point, she picked up her phone and tried uploading content from her camera roll. The uploads kept failing. She lost consciousness sometime before midnight. She was found unresponsive in her tent the next morning. Both cameras were recovered from the tent. The memory cards had 94 video clips from the summit, the last one time-stamped at 11:31 a.m. Her oxygen mask is on in some frames and completely gone in others. Her phone logs showed repeated failed upload attempts between 9:20 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. She was trying to post to Instagram the entire time she was up there. Postmortem confirmed cause of death as high-altitude pulmonary edema. Contributing factors included prolonged exposure at extreme altitude, repeated removal of supplemental oxygen above 29,000 feet, insufficient emergency oxygen for the descent, and an incomplete acclimatization schedule that left her physiologically underprepared for the time she spent in the death zone. No distress call was ever made. Her Sherpa had burned through his own emergency oxygen through the night, trying to keep her stable. He was evacuated to base camp with the rest of the team the following day, physically unharmed. The case was ruled death by misadventure. No further investigation was opened. Her operator was not found to be at fault. Keisha lost her life at 29,000 feet, because she couldn't stop reshooting a photo. Up next, a guy who thought hauling a ring light to the death zone was a good idea. It was March 8th, 2026. The northeast ridge route runs along Everest's Tibetan side, high and exposed. Temperatures that morning were sitting around minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill, and forecasters had flagged a deteriorating weather system moving in from the west by late afternoon. Jorvin Cass was 25. He ran a YouTube adventure channel, cinematic intros, color-graded footage, the kind of channel where every video feels like a mini-movie. He had one guided Denali climb under his belt, turned it into a series. It did well, and in his head that was apparently enough to take on Everest. He had already locked in a gear sponsorship before he even landed in Tibet. Free equipment in exchange for product placement footage at the summit, which tells you exactly what his priorities were going into this. So, on top of all his standard gear, he shows up to base camp with a tripod, a battery-powered ring light, a gimbal, and 2 camera bodies. Look, extra weight at altitude isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. And the northeast ridge is already longer and harder than the standard South Col route. Jorvin was stacking the odds against himself before he even took a step. His Sherpas brought up the weight 3 times during acclimatization rotations. He heard them out and changed nothing. At the pre-summit briefing, his lead Sherpa told him flat out the camera bag needed to stay behind. Jorvin's compromise was leaving one camera body and the power bank. He kept the ring light, the gimbal, and the tripod, still roughly 9 pounds more than anyone else on the team was carrying. The summit push left advanced base camp at 11 p.m. By the time the team got near the first step, at around 27,800 feet, Jorvin was already falling behind. He stopped twice on the fixed ropes to film, once below the first step and once just below the second step, setting up his tripod on a narrow ridge section while other climbers stood in line behind him, waiting. At 28,000 feet, in minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit wind, waiting for this guy to get his shot. He cleared the second step at around 8:50 a.m., nearly 2 hours behind schedule. His lead Sherpa had stayed with him the whole time, while the rest of the group pushed ahead. Jorvin hit the summit at 11:22 a.m. and spent 34 minutes up there trying to set up the ring light, which, under direct high-altitude sunlight, did absolutely nothing on camera. The battery died after 6 minutes in the cold anyway. The entire sponsored segment, the whole reason he dragged 14 pounds of camera gear up Everest, ended up being shot handheld in flat daylight with no lighting rig whatsoever. I mean, let that sink in for a second. He started descending at 11:56 a.m. The weather system came in earlier than forecast. By 1:30 p.m., wind speeds above the second step had climbed past 45 miles per hour with gusting. Jorvin's pace on the way down was critically slow. His legs were giving out. At around 27,600 feet, just above the first step, he sat down on the ridge and couldn't get back up. His Sherpa tried to get him to his feet repeatedly. A second Sherpa from a nearby team came over to help. Together they managed to move him about 200 feet further down before he became fully unresponsive. A distress call went out from the ridge at approximately 3:10 p.m. A ground rescue at that location in those conditions wasn't going to happen before dark. The 2 Sherpas stayed with him as long as it was physically safe to do so. He died on the ridge. His body was recovered 3 days later when the weather finally cleared enough to allow access. The ring light was found still attached to the tripod at the summit. The gimbal was recovered near the first step. Footage pulled from the memory card showed 34 minutes of summit content, including the 6 seconds of ring light footage before the battery died. His final recorded words on camera, filmed at the summit while the wind was picking up behind him, were directed straight at his audience. He was telling them to subscribe. Cause of death was recorded as exhaustion-induced collapse and exposure. Contributing factors included excessive carried weight during the summit push, a critically delayed summit timeline, and inability to descend before the weather window closed. His Sherpas were not found to be at fault. They stayed on that ridge longer than was safe for either of them. He hauled a ring light to the top of the world, and it cost him everything. Now, let's move on to a woman who fired her Sherpa mid-climb on the Lhotse face. And what happened after that is where it gets bad. It was January 22nd, 2026. The Lhotse face is a near vertical wall of glacial ice on Everest's southeast side, rising from the western CWM toward the South Col. It spans roughly 3,700 feet of continuous 45 to 55 degree ice slope. Fixed ropes run the length of it during climbing season. Without them, or without being clipped to them, a fall on the Lhotse face does not stop. At 26, Seren Vael had built a solid Instagram following through fitness content, gym workouts, macro-tracked meals, and what she called high-altitude adventures in her bio. She had summited Island Peak in Nepal the year before and done a guided Mont Blanc climb, which in her mind apparently qualified her to treat Everest like a content shoot. She had hired a personal Sherpa specifically to act as her dedicated shot getter. His job was to position himself above or below her on the rope to capture her moving through the terrain. She had briefed him on framing before they even left base camp. Not on safety, on framing. Fixed rope climbing on the Lhotse face needs both hands engaged, one on the ascender, one on the rope or ice axe. Full attention on foot placement. It is not a place to be unclipped, and it is definitely not a place to be thinking about camera angles. The team was on a rotation climb to Camp 3 at around 24,000 feet. Not even a summit push, just a training rotation. Conditions were fine. Wind was low, ice was firm. About 2/3 of the way up the face, Serene's Sherpa moved into her frame while repositioning for a shot. She stopped on the rope, unclipped her ascender, and stepped sideways to reframe. She gestured for him to move further down. He did. She clipped back in and kept going. This happened twice more over the next 300 feet. And look, the first 2 times she unclipped, she was still within arm's reach of the rope. Reckless, but she got away with it. That's the thing about getting away with something on a mountain like this. It doesn't mean it was safe, it just means the mountain hasn't collected yet. The 3rd time, she unclipped entirely and moved off the fixed line by about 4 feet to get a cleaner angle for a self-filmed clip on her pole-mounted camera. And this is the part that gets me. She wasn't even on the summit push. She was on a training rotation. She was doing this for a clip on a training rotation. Her Sherpa reached toward her. Whether to hand her something or pull her back to the rope isn't clear. She pulled her arm back. In that movement, her crampon front points lost contact with the ice. She had no axe planted. She wasn't clipped to anything. She fell immediately. On a 50-degree ice face with no anchor and no planted axe, there is no self-arrest from a standing position. She fell roughly 600 feet before her trajectory broke against a rock band at the base of a steeper section. 2 climbers ascending below her saw the whole thing. They reached her in about 20 minutes. She was still alive when they got there. She had a fractured left femur, multiple broken ribs, and a serious head injury despite wearing a helmet. She was conscious but not responding to questions. A distress call went out immediately. Given her position on the face and the extent of her injuries, a helicopter extraction was the only realistic option. A rescue flight was dispatched from a lower staging area. It arrived approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes after the fall. She had already died. Cause of death was blunt force trauma with internal hemorrhage. Her helmet had a significant impact fracture on the left side. Her camera was still mounted to the pole and was recovered at the fall site. The last clip on the card was 14 seconds long. It shows her stepping off the fixed line, the frame tilting as she adjusts her grip, and then the image dropping and spinning as the pole fell with her. The clip ends on impact. Her Sherpa was uninjured. He had been clipped to the fixed rope the entire time. The case was ruled accidental death. No further investigation was opened. A review of the recovered footage and witness accounts confirmed the sequence of events. There was no ambiguity in the findings. She had unclipped from the fixed line voluntarily, in a location where no experienced climber would ever do that, to get a better angle for a video clip. She unclipped from a fixed rope on the Lhotse face for a better camera angle and fell 600 feet. Meanwhile, there's a guy who decided the balcony at 27,600 feet was the perfect place to go live on TikTok. It was March 19th, 2026. The balcony on Everest's southeast ridge sits at around 27,600 feet, a small, relatively flat shelf of snow and rock that serves as the main rest and oxygen checkpoint during summit pushes on the South Col route. Most climbers spend 10 to 15 minutes there, swap oxygen bottles, and move. At that altitude, your body is consuming itself, and every minute you stay still makes the next step harder. Tavio Renk was the kind of guy who put extreme challenges in his TikTok bio. Gym content, travel vlogs, the whole package. He was 23, had no technical climbing background, and his entire high-altitude experience was a guided base camp trek the year before, and one rotation on Mera Peak with a commercial operator. That was it. He signed up for a full Everest expedition through a mid-tier operator, and actually wrote on his intake form that his goal was to be the first TikToker to go live from the death zone. He brought brought a satellite-enabled smartphone in an insulated case, had already tested the live streaming at Base Camp and Camp 2, and had told his followers the exact date of his summit push. The whole climb was planned around the stream. Here's what people don't talk about enough with high altitude. Your brain goes before your body does. Judgment, risk assessment, the ability to recognize that you're in trouble. Those are the first things to slip. A climber at 27,600 feet who feels fine is genuinely not a reliable judge of whether they're fine. Tavio reached the balcony at around 2:40 a.m. during the summit push. The team stopped for the standard oxygen swap. He pulled out his phone and started a TikTok live. It opened to about 140 concurrent viewers, way below what he was expecting. So he announced he was staying live until he hit 10,000. His guide told him it was time to move. He held up a finger. The team waited. Viewer count climbed slowly. By 3:15 a.m., it was at 380. By 3:40 a.m., it was at 610. His guide told him again, more firmly, that the team was moving. Tavio said he'd catch up, and they left. Not out of negligence. At that altitude, a guide cannot physically force an adult climber to move, and staying stationary with him meant putting the rest of the team at risk. So there he is, alone at 27,600 feet in the middle of the night, watching a viewer count tick up on his phone while his oxygen bottle drains at a steady rate he isn't monitoring. By 4:20 a.m., the count was at 1,100. By 4:50 a.m., his responses in the live chat were fragmented and incoherent, short, nonsensical replies to comments. Some viewers were laughing, some were genuinely alarmed. At 5:03 a.m., the stream cut out. His phone battery had died in the cold. His oxygen bottle ran out somewhere between 4:30 and 5 a.m. based on the fill level documented at Camp 4. A descending team found him at around 7:15 a.m., seated. Against the rock face at the balcony, phone still in his gloved hand, oxygen mask displaced to the side of his face. He wasn't breathing. His body temperature indicated he had been dead for at least 2 hours. No distress call was ever made. The descending team radioed Base Camp when they found him. His body was brought down to the South Col and later recovered to Base Camp. His phone was retrieved. A screen recording of the live stream captured by viewers showed the full sequence: the waiting, the slow deterioration, the final incoherent comments. Peak concurrent viewership during the entire stream was 1,240. He never came close to 10,000. Cause of death was oxygen deprivation, leading to hypoxic cardiac arrest. Contributing factors included voluntary separation from the guided team, failure to monitor oxygen supply, and prolonged stationary exposure at 27,600 feet for approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. His guided team was not found to be at fault. He sat alone at 27,600 feet, watching a viewer count that never got where he wanted it, and never made it off that ledge. Up on the south summit, a guy who thought stripping to his waist at 28,700 feet was a good idea for a thumbnail. It was February 3rd, 2026. The south summit of Everest sits at 28,704 feet, about 330 feet below the true summit along a narrow ridge traverse. Even on good weather days, sustained winds of 20 to 30 miles per hour are common up there, and wind chill can push apparent temperatures to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. It is one of the most exposed positions on the entire mountain. Torren Kraith was the kind of guy whose entire brand was built around the idea that the human body has no limits. Shirtless workout content, body transformation videos, TikTok followers who tuned in specifically to watch him do things that looked physically impossible. He was 24, genuinely fit, and had actually put in the work before this climb. Guided ascents of Aconcagua and Denali, serious training, a reputable operator. His Sherpa was experienced. His physical preparation was solid. His judgment, though, that was a different story. At 28,700 feet with wind chill factored in, exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 2 minutes, and the fingers, which you need to manage zippers, buckles, and oxygen equipment, are among the first things to lose function. A down suit that comes off at that altitude is not easy to get back on under any circumstances. With compromised hands, it can be nearly impossible. Torren had told his Sherpa at Camp 4 during the pre-push check that he was planning to remove his suit briefly at the south summit for a photo. His Sherpa told him not to. He nodded. He had already decided he was doing it. He reached the south summit at around 8:20 a.m. Wind was sitting at about 22 miles per hour, temperature around minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit before wind chill. He stopped, unclipped from the fixed line, and started taking his down suit off. His Sherpa grabbed his arm. Torren shook him off. pulled the suit down to his waist, handed his Sherpa his phone, and posed. He wanted multiple angles. He wanted a video clip too. The full exposure lasted about 11 minutes. I've heard of people doing some wild things on this mountain, but this one genuinely makes me wonder what was going through his head up there at 28,700 feet. In minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit, shirtless, for a thumbnail. By the time he started pulling the suit back up, his fingers were already failing. He couldn't grip the zipper. His Sherpa had to dress him, pulling the suit up, working the zipper, refastening the buckles. By the time the suit was secured, Torin's hands were visibly white from the wrist to the fingertips. He was shivering violently and his speech was slurred. They pushed on to the true summit, which Torin reached at around 9:55 a.m. He spent less than 10 minutes there. On the way down, his pace was badly compromised. He couldn't grip the fixed rope properly with either hand, so his Sherpa managed his descender at every anchor. By the time they reached the balcony at around 12:40 p.m., Torin was barely moving and complaining of chest pain. His Sherpa administered emergency oxygen and radioed for support. A second Sherpa met them at the South Col. He got back to Camp 4 at around 2:15 p.m. and was placed in a tent. His core temperature was critically low. He went into cardiac arrest at approximately 4:30 p.m. Resuscitation was attempted by team members on site. It wasn't successful. His body was recovered from Camp 4 and brought down to base camp over the following 2 days. When his gear was examined, both hands showed full thickness frostbite from the fingers to mid-palm. His phone was recovered with it. 7 photos and one 43-second video clip from the South Summit were still on the card. In the video, he is grinning at the camera, bare-chested, arms out, at 28,704 feet. His Sherpa is visible at the edge of the frame, not looking at him. The timestamp on the first photo was 8:23 a.m. The last was 8:34 a.m., 11 minutes, exactly as the Sherpa had reported. Postmortem confirmed cause of death as hypothermia-induced cardiac arrest. Contributing factors included prolonged cold exposure at extreme altitude, frostbite-related loss of function, and delayed return to lower elevation. The frostbite to both hands was severe enough that even if he had survived, the damage would have been permanent. The case was ruled death by misadventure. His operator was not found to be at fault. This guy took his shirt off at 28,700 feet for a thumbnail, and his body paid the price. The last one is a different kind of stupid. It was January 9th, 2026. Camp 3 on the Southeast Ridge route sits at around 23,500 feet on the Lhotse face. Tents pitched on carved ledges barely wide enough to lie flat. Getting someone out of there in an emergency means either a technical lower down near vertical, ice, or a helicopter extraction, and neither of those is fast. Oswin Vex was 28. Actually, let me back up. You'd know the type the second you saw his feed. Sponsored outdoor athlete, trail running, alpine climbing, branded content, the whole thing. He had active deals with 2 mid-size outdoor gear companies and had built a decent Instagram following around his climbs. His sponsors had structured a content schedule around his Everest attempt. Specific posts from Base Camp, Camp 1, Camp 2, and the summit, with rough dates attached to each. The schedule had been built around an optimistic acclimatization timeline, and Oswin had agreed to it without once flagging the conflict with his operator's recommended rotation plan. Acclimatization on Everest is not something you can negotiate around. The standard rotation, climbing high, sleeping low, repeating over several weeks, forces your body to gradually produce more red blood cells and adapt to the reduced oxygen. Skip or shorten those rotations and your body doesn't adapt. It just doesn't. And you won't know that until you're already too high for anyone to easily get you down. Oswin completed his first rotation to Camp 1 on schedule. His second rotation, which should have taken him to Camp 2 for 2 nights, got cut to 1 because he had a sponsored post due and needed reliable connectivity to upload from base camp. He logged it as 2 nights in his operator's system. His third rotation to Camp 3 was shortened by a full day for the same reason. A product video his sponsor had pushed up the deadline on. He logged that as complete too. Nobody verified it in real time. Why would they? He was a sponsored athlete. He knew what he was doing, right? He felt fine at base camp, fine at Camp 1, slightly off at Camp 2 during the summit push, but figured it was a bad night's sleep. By the time he reached Camp 3 at 23,500 feet, he had a headache he rated to his Sherpa as a 7 out of 10. He took ibuprofen and lay down. The headache didn't improve. Over the next 3 hours, it got significantly worse and he started vomiting. His Sherpa recognized the pattern immediately and administered dexamethasone from the team's medical kit, a steroid used to reduce brain swelling in HACE cases. HACE is what happens when your brain swells in response to hypoxia. Early stages look like a severe headache, nausea, and loss of coordination. Later stages are confusion, unconsciousness, and death. The only real treatment is getting down immediately. Every hour you stay at altitude after onset makes it worse. Oswin refused to descend for about 4 hours after symptoms started, told his Sherpa he just needed to sleep it off. And here's the thing, the confusion, the poor judgment, the certainty that he was fine, that's the HACE talking. By the time his Sherpa made the call unilaterally and started preparing him to move, Oswin couldn't stand without help. He was semi-conscious and couldn't follow basic instructions. Getting a non-ambulatory climber down the Lhotse face from Camp 3 is one of the hardest rescues on the mountain. His Sherpa radioed for support, and a second Sherpa began ascending from Camp 2. The process of lowering him down near vertical ice on fixed ropes started at around 11 p.m. It was slow and exhausting. Oswin lost consciousness completely at around 1:30 a.m. He died before reaching Camp 2, somewhere around 22,000 feet on the Lhotse face. Time of death was estimated between 2 and 3 a.m. His body was brought down to base camp the following day. His phone and a small camera were recovered with him. When his operator cross-referenced his GPS movement data against the rotation logs Oswin had submitted, the discrepancies were immediate and obvious. The shortened rotations, the falsified overnight entries, all of it. His sponsor's content schedule was still open on his phone. The last post he had uploaded from base camp 2 days before the day summit push was a photo of him smiling in full kit with a caption about trusting the process. Cause of death was confirmed as high-altitude cerebral edema. Contributing factors included insufficient acclimatization, delayed descent after symptom onset, and falsified rotation logs that masked how underprepared his body actually was. His operator was not found to be at fault. The falsified entries had been made by Oswin himself.